We're live right now, by the way.
Great.
Oh, amazing. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Before anything else, we're going to acknowledge the country that we're on, the unceded lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Mianjin. We acknowledge elders past, present and emerging and extend that acknowledgement to First Nations people joining us today. And if you're not joining us from Mianjin, please take a moment to acknowledge the country you're joining us from. Cool. I'm going to do a brief introduction about what BVAA is.
Thanks, no.
But thank you all so much for joining us on a Sunday evening. So this is the second live stream that BVAA has done, but if you're not familiar with our group, we're a working group. Our members are artists and arts workers. Our core members are Marisa, Amelia and myself. And between us we have a background as artists, as arts workers, as board members for non-for-profits and arts organisations, as directors for ARIs, and a little bit of social work and legal studies in the mix as well. So in the past, BVAA has done all sorts of types of work. We've organised meetups for directors of ARIs in Brisbane. We've done things like attend committee meetings for the Committee of Brisbane to represent independent and the emerging arts sector. We've made submissions on cultural policy to ensure grassroots arts organisations are acknowledged and included. And we've provided support to arts workers in small arts organisations and ARIs that kind of are lacking a HR department and that sort of thing.
We're as close as you get to an HR in the independent scene. So
yeah, it's just peer support and
yeah,
sessions.
peer support.
So we are a working group, and that means anyone is able to contribute and participate as much or as little as they want. We're kind of here to facilitate the in-between things in the arts sectors that arts organisations and institutions aren't able to do.
Yeah.
So if there's particular projects that you want to approach BVAA with, or support that you need for the work that you're doing.
Do you want to learn to write a policy submission?
We hope to be gap filler for that kind of stuff. Our aim is to provide that loose structure to facilitate the needs of the Brisbane's arts community. We're all about slow, small, humble actions.
We're pretty slow.
Trying to create a bit more of a sustainable model for how we respond as a group.
We're like anti-perfectionistic about everything.
We have a website. We've made a great zine pamphlet that kind of tells you more about us if you want to check that out. It's Brisbane Visual Arts Advocacy.com.
Yeah.
And just a little bit about how the live stream will work. So you'll be able to talk to us in the comments, which you'll be able to see up on screen as well. And Amelia will be the voice of the people throughout the stream. And she's also doing all the incredible hard labour of working out how tech works.
Invisible tech labour.
And the discussion is also going to be recorded and available on our YouTube channel if you want to play it back or share it with people. And now I'm going to introduce our guest of honour. So Mark's joining us for this discussion, and Mark does a bunch of things. He is an artist who creates incredibly vibrant and bombastic installations with textiles and other mediums. He had a major show at Moreton Bay Galleries, if you were lucky enough to see it. He curates exhibitions for artist-run initiatives, including XYZ ARI, where he is a director. And on the side, Mark also makes incredible works for queer events. So you might have seen some of his pieces there. And he's just a generally amazing person in the queer arts community. He's spoken on podcasts and in panel discussions, etc., etc.
Welcome.
That's lots of talking from me, so I'm going to hand over to Marisa. What's our topic for today, and
why are we talking about burnout? Why are we talking about burnout? I guess because it's happening to a lot of us, like probably more than most people realize. It's really bad for you. Like it's contributes to anxiety and depression and other mental health problems. It's also got like physical physical effects, you know, like adrenal fatigue and, you know, chronic stress is actually correlated with like heaps of health issues. So it's actually it's really bad. Like, you don't want to mess with it. You want to avoid it if possible. And I suppose it affects artists in a very particular way. So what we're keen to kind of pull out a bit in this session is like how the makeup of the industry and how the industry functioning actually affects levels of burnout in the arts and how it manifests specifically. Yeah, it's something that's pretty close to my heart. I think I can safely say that all of us have some personal experience with burnout. I once had one where I couldn't work for 3 to 5 months. Like, it's hardcore. Yeah, and I think, Amelia, you were saying before, like, until you've had your first one, sometimes you don't really understand it.
Yeah, you really don't.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, it feels weird to say, because we just said it before, but, you know, when you're at uni and you hear other people talk about burnout, like, I don't know what it is, like, you kind of, like, think less of them, but you shouldn't, because it's so common, everyone goes through it at some point.
Yeah.
And then when you go through it for the first time, that's when you're like, oh shit, like, this is what the art world is.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
This is like it shouldn't be, but it's absolutely like a part of what being an artist, of being a creative in general is.
Yeah.
You know?
I think like the judgment is part of being caught on the rat race, like the wheel.
Yeah.
That you're working so hard and you're pushing through, like, so desperate not to give up or give in, that when you see other people take time for themselves because they've been having a really hard time, part of you is like envious, and that's where the judgment comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember who I was talking to about it. It might have been one of you all, but it's also about like competing with your friends. Like, that hurts when you get something and then they don't get it, or they get something and you don't get it. Like, that like contributes a lot to the burnout of it.
Yeah, and rejection letters, stock standard rejection letters. Yeah.
And then you ask for feedback and it's never like enough.
Yeah.
You know, but
yeah, definitely. I think what you were kind of saying is that you at first tend to attribute it to some sort of personal deficit in the person who's going through it, but I think it's pretty like safe to say that if so many people are dealing with it, like, there's got to be a structural thing going on. It's not that all of us don't have good enough coping strategies, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why did you want to join, Mark?
Yeah, tell us.
I'm currently going through burnout, and it's not the first time that I've experienced it. I think it's 3 times in 3 years, and I'm at a point in my career, I'm still at an early stage of my career, but recognizing that it's not a sustainable way to conduct a practice. And if I want to create a sustainable practice for myself, that there must be a better way. And I think it's really important to talk about it, because there's still lots of shame and guilt around it to say, I'm fucking tired. And it's not in an emotional dumping, not a whingy way. It's saying, I'm tired, aren't you tired? We can be honest about it, right? But there's still this feeling that you have to be on the ball and have the next project lined up. And it doesn't always work like that.
Yeah, totally.
I was saying to Amelia that my most recent bout of burnout, it felt like I'd signed up to do like a quarter marathon, and like I ran like 13 kilometers of it, and there was only like 1 to go, or I don't know how long a quarter marathon is actually.
It's
like,
really long.
Very long.
With that 1 kilometer to go, you just know you can't keep going, and so you have to stop, and then everyone's like, oh, you didn't finish the marathon. It's like, I ran 12 Ks. That's very impressive.
Yeah, my first one was at the start of all the COVID lockdowns. That before that, I was priding myself on this, that I live and breathe art, that every second, every day, that even at the job that pays the mortgage, that I'm thinking about art, that everything is connecting, and I feel like I haven't been doing enough in my life. And here I found the thing that I'm really good at, and that I'm kicking all these goals, and I felt like maybe the hamster wheel, but at the time I didn't realize it, and that I wanted to keep that momentum going. And so I was on exchange in Hong Kong, and coming towards the end of it, the Hong Kong protests were happening, and so there's lots of chaos there, and they shut down the semester, and decided to still have a holiday and stay on. But I was working on trying to get into the art world there, working on projects for here at home, was doing the study, trying to have a life, and I got really sick. And then we came home, and the idea in my head was that I'll finish the degree, the arts degree, and we'll move to Melbourne and do all this fun, crazy stuff. And then COVID hit, and then I spent a month in bed. Not unlike a lot of people, because we all felt the world for ourselves stop. But I think on top of that, that I wanted to keep this thing going, this momentum, this energy that it's so seductive that you should be constantly doing something and working towards the next goal. And what did they say? That you do something enough times that it becomes a habit, and once you're stuck in that there's no... It squeezes out all this opportunity for yourself in your brain to go, hang on a minute, maybe you should rest for a bit, because no one anywhere says that, hey, wait a minute, stop. That you need to sit back and enjoy this and take a breather.
Yeah. I like what you said about habits, because I think it's very hard to explain what burnout feels like to somebody who doesn't experience it. But like habits, like the number of things you do in your daily life that are just routine, like getting out of bed, showering, brushing your teeth. Like as soon as depression sets in, all of those things are a chore, and like it gets to the point where it's so bad that like I had to write out checklists for myself to be like, get out of bed, brush your teeth. And I think like an arts practice can feel like that as well. Like when you're in a good like state, you're like applying for shows, you're putting on shows, you're like in the cycle of your practice. But like when that builds up, like that kind of ennui sets in, and then those things you used to really enjoy about your practice, or that were just second nature, become chores. And then like you have to reflect on like, why am I working so hard to get through this to-do list?
Definitely. And well, choosing to have a life of art and living and breathing it, that there's no distinction like other jobs where you leave it at your desk and you close the door and go to bed. That when you're creative, that you choose to often have this life where you're always on, and there's no division, that you're always thinking about it, that you're in the toilet, you're thinking about it, you're talking to someone on the street, you're thinking about it. And all of that is important for the practice, because you're gestating, that you're thinking, that you're informing your practice and the outcomes. But all of that takes so much energy, doesn't it?
It's labour.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, well that actually
that's a good
ties into what we were going to talk about, which is like, as artists, like I personally feel like we have to understand the entire scope of the labour that we're engaging in if we want to like ward against burnout, because there's a lot of different kinds of labour. One of them is that gestation that you were talking about, that's really hard to like capture and boundary and measure and value as well. So I kind of see networking as one of them as well. Like you're not technically like working to make a piece of art, but you are actually labouring. You're like having to put on your networking face, your network mask, and you know, that pressure to attend everything, because there's this pressure to be like socially visible as well as creatively visible, I think. That doesn't go away. That like self-performance, the gestation period, the what was the other one I said, networking, they're all examples of like the actual scope of what being an artist is.
And like the divide between material labour and immaterial labour, and how we value those two things differently. Like an arts practice is all about the material labour of like actually making the art and putting it out there, but there's very little scope for acknowledging or factoring in the immaterial labour. And that goes down to like how arts projects are funded as well. Like you're given often not enough of an artist fee, and then the breakdown of like what that covers for material, what that covers for actual labour of making the work. The thing that we're never paying artists to do is the immaterial labour.
Actually, there's this quote by Bojana Kunst that I really enjoy.
Sorry, Bojana who?
Bojana Kunst.
You
Yeah.
stop swearing at me, mate.
But she's kind of talking about like how we come to like consume ourselves as artists, like we come to consume like our own abilities and actions. So she says, if we wish to work successfully, we must come across as relaxed as possible, babble as much as possible, be as shameful, flexible and creative as possible, enjoy and show all of our potentiality and be critical to boot. Furthermore, we must do this publicly because contemporary work increasingly takes place before the eyes of another. I just read that and was like, oh my God, like you do kind of have to perform this like, you have to perform your potential all the time. Like you kind of can't let that mask drop when all of your relationships are both personal and professional. Yeah.
I think there is a reason why artists and arts workers are so susceptible to burnout. And I think like what that quote mentioned, being critical, like we're all highly engaged, critical, reflective people in how we are thinking about things, how we understand performativity, how we understand the construction of identity and all of those sorts of things. So there's like a layer of labour that we're putting into like what the stuff we're making, and then who we are as a person for it to be relevant for us to be making that stuff, and then how we're communicating that constantly, not just in professional but also in social settings, that like the feedback loop within your brain just is a lot.
Yeah, and like the pressure to brand yourself as well now, like is increasing.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think it definitely goes hand in hand with capitalism and the Instagram world that we're currently in culturally, that there's this pressure to be a product, to market yourself, to be a personality, and being in this 24-hour news cycle. I know it sounds hokey, but you're this product. So of course you've got to be on all the time and be amazing, because we're not only seeing the outcome of the art, the importance of that, but you're also the personality that goes with it. That you think of Van Gogh, however you say it. Let's call him VG. And if he went out there and said, "Hey, I cut off my ear and I'm eating yellow paint," who knows if he actually did that? But people go, "You're crazy. I don't want to buy your stuff." But he was allowed the privilege, I suppose, of not having to be on all the time and be living in a celebrity world where you have to be everything to everyone at all times, which is exhausting.
Yeah, like there has sort of like from kind of like modernism onwards in the Western canon, there has been this kind of thing of like your art needs to have an identity, like your art needs to have a brand. But we're moving further and further into like intersecting artists with influences, so you're actually just like self-commodifying to a far greater degree, and it's really hard to know you're doing that because you're just like internalizing messages all the time without even knowing it, and it does take some kind of like deep reflection to really like understand where that's happening and undo it if you can. Like I'm a big fan of like ejecting all the internalized capitalism out of my system as much as possible.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Who taught us how to be an artist? Like who taught us how to like live in the art world and like live like that and be an influencer? Like is it like something that we have like projected upon ourselves, or is it something that we've learnt from other people that project themselves as successful?
I don't know.
Oh, dang.
I would call it like a dominant discourse. It's kind of like just something that's floating around and we're like swimming in it, so it feels
like
very natural to me that you would like internalize that because we're swimming in it all the time.
I wonder where it originates from. Any clues? Any thoughts?
I think for me, I always tried to model myself off of the artist you perceived as making it.
Yeah.
And so they do have like a status as an individual as well as their practice. And so you'd like try and do the same things they do, like have an Instagram, have a website, have a bio on your website that tells about who you are, because you can't just put your art online, you have to explain who you are as well. But yeah, that's a really great question of like where it started, like the people that I'm modeling myself off as a practitioner, who did they model themselves off?
Yeah, but also just to say a quote that Soda Jerk said yesterday at that talk at Goma, they said we're no longer living in a 9 to 5 world, we're living in a 5 to 9 world as well. So it's 9 to 5 and 5 to 9 as well. And I was like, fuck, that's insane. And it's everyone as well.
Yes.
Because
it's not just artists.
What they've done is they've seen that artists are willing to do all this free labor to like try and get somewhere, to like try and be a little bit like, I don't know, influence or like live a creative free life. And they're like, well, we're going to appropriate this model and put it onto everything. Oh, you're an Uber driver? You're actually like an artist. You know? Oh, you make sandwiches? You're a sandwich artist. So, you know, it doesn't, if you make minimum wage, you just have to hustle harder.
Yeah. Well, a lot of our like current working structures kind of, like the gig economy structure, it was kind of sold to all of us as a artistic freedom dream.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you get to like work for yourself, you get to be doing what you love, you get to be free from bureaucratic bullshit, you know.
It
did sell itself to us as a creative lifestyle. But it had a dark side, because it's like, if you're just on your own in a gig economy, like there's no HR, there's no sick days, there's no there's no support, there's all of the admins on you, like it's actually just further responsibilized us as individuals, which works great for capitalism because they don't want to take responsibility, you know. Like,
that's so true.
Yeah.
I think it's learned and taught. We're indoctrinated into the system, and then we get all jaded, and the newcomers come in and are indoctrinated into the system. It's this weird hazing circle jerk that is... What's the snake that eats its tail that goes around and around?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean.
Or a Boris snake or something.
Yeah. That I'm a big fan of mentoring and giving advice to new people that are coming into the art world, and being frank with them and saying, oh, this is... Because I was in that position once upon a time ago, and look, if you think about it, that the public and institutions, and no one in particular, it's... culturally that we're moving this way, and I don't know, in some ways it's really easy to feel disempowered and powerless to stop it, but we'll come up with solutions. That nothing has changed. You think the people that we're told to value and laud in this present time. I think of, say, example, Matisse, who at the time when he painted his wife's face with green, that people thought he was fucking crazy. They're like, what is this sort of garbage? And now we're told, we say that we love him. And to me, that's an example of the culture, the public, the institution, that artists and our outcomes, the artworks, that we've always been expendable, that they'll switch us out and find someone else at a drop of a hat, because capitalism, the ultimate goal is to find the next product. And it's a really good opportunity for us to go, hey, well, we can steer the ship then. If the system hasn't changed, well, we can change how we feel about it. But therein lies the challenge, isn't it? That if you don't, I think I said this before, you don't know that you're in the middle of a cyclone when you're in the middle of a cyclone.
True.
That it seems calm, but it's actually fucking nuts out there. And how do you take a slice out of Mother Nature's pie, or a page out of a book, and go, hey, what can I do to make art on my terms? And I think that's difficult, that all of us struggle with that. lots of people have struggled with that before, and lots of people will struggle with that in the future.
Yeah.
I think this like needing to construct a persona to go with your practice and this attention economy thing we're stuck in is something contemporary art is particularly susceptible to, because I think the only way to make money out of an arts practice is to like produce product, artworks to sell, or to enter the grant funding scheme. And to like be grant funded, you need to be proposing projects that are like on this scale, and then also cultivating a professional persona that shows you're able to deliver that. And I think that's where a lot of the immaterial labor and like having a name for yourself, like so that you can win those grants, you're somebody like deserving of them.
Yes.
So those are really only the two models we have to like make enough money to live.
I mean, it's a really good point that contemporary art is really stuck in the project model. Like, artwork right now is normally made up of all these like projects that are able to be like bounded, and they have a concrete outcome, and to have a consistent practice, it's like, oh, you just want to have like lots of projects kind of thing. But that's not really, I mean, I see that model as actually further incentivizing people to like overwork, because it's not the same as having a practice that's ongoing, a practice that's embedded, a practice that's more like a vocation, where it's like it's coming through in your like in the way you sort of interact with the world. It's like, oh no, we have to have just like lots of these like bite-sized consumables actually work with a more ongoing and embedded practice rather than just these like bite-sized ones. Yeah, and I don't exactly know what that looks like, but I'm kind of trying to work it out at the moment. Yeah, but to me it's like the exhibition model, even when you think about an art institution or something, it's like, okay, we have like a program of exhibitions, and I can't really like separate that from just working the same way as an Instagram feed or something does, where it's like, okay, new one, new exhibition, and once you're done with like that content, it just like goes into the void and it's sort of just disposed of in a way, because it's just about like new thing, you know. It's kind of where that hamster wheel feeling comes from, I think.
Yes. And once you're on the wheel, that what do you do to get off it? But how do we properly inform people who are just starting off to not be encouraged to get on the hamster wheel or unwittingly get on it? Because you're saying that is the system that we just fall into because
it's what's there.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that's there right now, you know.
I wonder if you don't get on the hamster wheel, if people then don't view you as a success, so they don't then appropriate your model of making art. And so, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, because people
You're not
like
a successful
people like, you've been on the
artist.
hamster wheel for years. You must be doing really great. This other person that like gets on the hamster wheel every now and then, they aren't that good. They aren't as good as this person's been doing it for 10 years, right? But then they don't realize that person's been doing it for 10 years also has like a team of people running with them. So when that person, like the main person has burnout, there's actually still like 8 other people running on that hamster wheel for them, but they don't see it that way.
Or they just like have no super and no savings and are not actually, they're still hustling. They're still stuck in the hustle.
Yeah, well, they're like stuck in like, I need to survive.
Yeah.
You know,
some of our like most famous living artists like still can't afford to buy a house and can't afford to do all kinds of important things.
Yeah.
That's the thing that it's taken me to eat 17 bowls of concrete to realize that my mental health is more important than the art, and it's taken a lot of energy and effort and heartache to go, hey, I need just to put this down for a second, that I'm not a robot, and that rest is really important, that I'm really not good at rest, that no one ever sits you down and says this is really important to your art. And it's learning a new skill, and often when you're learning a new skill that you trip up and you're actually not really good at it, and it's vital, I think, to an art practice. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah. You don't feel very creative when you're burnt out.
But I think, to backtrack, that we were talking before, just now, about not feeling like you're worthy, and if you're not, you're working your butt off for 10 years, so you feel like you deserve that you should get your name out there. Meanwhile, you're at the bottom and you're just starting off on this 10-year journey where you're going to, burn out. Sorry. That you think, well, one day I see this name all the time that's cropping up, that maybe mine will be, and this idea of perseverance, which is, it's fraught. Perseverance, I think.
Resilience too, hey?
Yes, that it goes back to the idea of what, as a society, or what ourselves personally, and all different levels, or what is valued, that just because your name isn't out there, we'll backtrack for a second, that doing your best is every day is what the best means. What's best for you is different. Some days that you're just surviving and getting out of bed is your best and you've reached a goal, fantastic. And other days you're doing all the things that you want to do, and that's a success too. But yeah, every day your best is different. And that goes in with your art as well, that you practice, and being yourself as a person, that just because you didn't get this, does that mean you're a shit artist? Does that mean your work is shit? Well, no, it doesn't. But it's so seductive to get into this binary of, I didn't get it, so therefore I'm shit, or therefore that I'm not good at it, and that I shouldn't do it anymore. And that's really, mentally, that's really tough. And then that feeds into the burnout, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Especially if you don't get, if you put in grants for like shows for an entire year and you don't get any of them, so you just don't practically can't exhibit for a year.
Yes.
That is like a huge contributor, because you're like, well, if I'm not making work, who's gonna see it?
Yes.
And it's not even just like institutions that are actually gonna pay you. It's like REs that are free. Like sometimes they just don't have space to show everyone.
No.
And there's not enough REs, like, because REs are like so prone to burnout as well. Like, so it's such a thing.
Might be good to like take an optimistic turn
Definitely.
of like
Sorry.
what you can do to avoid burnout, rather than just seeing how hard it all is. But like what you guys were saying about like putting yourself out there and trying to get your work picked up so that you stay relevant in people's minds, so that you're one of the names who is like thought of. I think there's a real like fear of being forgotten in the art industry, and also a mentality of you're only as good as your last show. Like, you put so much effort into making work and putting on an exhibition for like a 2-week showing or a one night only in an RE, and the number of people who come and how long they engage with the work and how they like feed that back to you as the maker, and then how long it stays in the cultural memory. Like, I think we all as a supportive community of arts workers could maybe let go of the idea of reputation a little more. Like, it's fine to take like a 5-year break from your practice and then still come back and apply for an RE, and hopefully as a community we could be open enough to say like, yes, we're going to show that artist again, like whatever they're up to now after this rest period, like they don't need a CV with an exhibition on every year, like it's fine to have breaks.
Yes.
I think a really huge thing that people like Paul Andrew and myself do is by archiving people's show, by going to people's shows and like collecting ephemera from their show, is hopefully alleviate some of that fear of being forgotten, because it's always going to exist in this archival instance, either in Paul's archive, my archive, and potentially at a Goma archive if we ever get around to making like an RE archive or an archive, like a Mianjin archive there. Because it is a huge thing of being forgotten, right? And that's like, from my perspective, like some people just, they're like, I'm done, I don't want to make work anymore. And that's a good, like, that's fine, but like then we'll have a document of what they've done and what they've been able to achieve, and they can look back on it themselves, but so can history. I love going through the Goma archives and looking at these magazines from like the mid-2000s and not recognizing any names, you know, because, you know, the fact that I can like read about these people's practices like 15 years in the future and just realize that they're exactly where I am. And it's the same with like people that are still practicing today, or like teachers today going back 15 years and going, oh, they're exactly where I am right now, and they've just pivoted, or they've like figured out another way, or they're still practicing. It's like really comforting to know that like someone's gone out and collected these things. Yeah.
And
But
as well as
also-
like it being okay to like take breaks, I think it also being okay to not do great work all the time.
Yes.
Like only being as good as your last exhibition. Like
Definitely.
something I loved about running our RE is that sometimes we'd put on really bad shows. Like they were badly curated, they were badly installed,
Yeah.
and sometimes the artist was still working some things out, and like the expectation of an artist-run initiative where we're all volunteering our time and it's underneath our house to be putting on amazing shows to be like worth our space, like
Yeah.
is ridiculous. Like more space for in between and makeshift and getting things, and like you were saying, sometimes all you have to do is your best.
Yeah.
But there is like a mentality of a standard in the arts industry of like this being the best for what an arts worker or what an artist would achieve. Like this is what is expected of you, and so your best, if it doesn't meet that, isn't good enough, and you internalize that. And
All this discourse around like reaching your potential, like that's a big ask. And like a lot of workplaces, I'm like, you don't deserve full potential. Like my full potential is for me. It's not for like wherever I'm working. And yeah, I don't know that, like I feel like that's a very new discourse actually, like at least in the way it's manifesting now. Like yeah, reaching your potential. It's like never ending.
Well,
You don't have to reach your potential.
It's true. Well, yeah, don't get me wrong before when I said doing your best every day, that's what's best for you. And, you know, your life is not a community project, ultimately. You're doing things for you to make yourself happy. And at the end of the day, you're the one living your life. And make yourself happy. That if you're miserable, well, it's hard to say it. Sometimes, yeah, take a break or don't do it. And it goes back to the question, yeah, what is good art and what's bad art? And it's okay to make whatever art that you want to make, because that's ultimately why we do what we do, isn't it? That yeah, sometimes it becomes a bit elitist when we're in this mode of judgment, because we think what is good art. And I'm sure if you're the most dour person or the most negative, you could go to the best show and still nitpick and think that it could be done in a better way. That you could have made the best art ever, and you've chosen that the way you get your art out there is Instagram, and just say you got 10 likes or something, and that doesn't mean that the best thing you've ever produced and you're so proud of is completely shit. No, of course not. That means you made the best thing and you should be proud of it. It's amazing. But the thing is that you're feeling shit because that you didn't win against the algorithm. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's the algorithm that
Or it's like external validation based.
yeah,
You
and
know?
it's working out how to get past all that seduction of falling to that trap.
Uncoupling my practice from what industry based notions of success are, I felt was really important for my well-being. Like actually thinking critically about what the industry treats as successful versus what I think is successful. And for me personally, it actually meant leaving the exhibition model behind, at least for now, and like going into like writing and zines, because I found that when I had a visual arts exhibition, it would be like, okay, you've done the opening and you get lots of nice compliments for the opening night, and then it's like never referred to again, and you don't know if you've got real feedback from it or not. And I was kind of like, oh, it was like months of work just for this like one night. And now I'm doing like zine making, and it nourishes me in a different way, because it's like you can keep publishing it. You often like know the person who's buying it off you. Next time you see them, they'll have a chat to you about whatever the writing was in it. You might not be getting as much exposure, but you know they'll be spending 10 minutes with it if they've bought it from you, you know? So it's like, that's actually like a really nice quality engagement. And I love seeing who else is interested in similar things to me using that model. So it feels a lot more collective and connecting. And yeah, like I'm sure a lot of people would be like, oh, Marisa hasn't had a visual arts exhibition in like 2 years or something. But like, yeah, finding like a working model that actually nourishes you is important. And part of doing that is looking critically at what success means for you, I think.
Definitely. Finding something outside of art is really important. But also, I find that talking to many different people, often outside of the art world, is really important too. I think of someone who I hold in quite high regard in the art world, and I was saying, oh, I'm all burned out, but I kind of still want to do all this stuff, and I've got all this stuff lined up. And I said, listen for a second, I haven't had a show in the last 4 years. Did you know that? I went, no. So, see, no one cares. Just do it on your terms. And that was, I think, yeah, really good moment that sticks in my mind. Yeah, what do you do to get around feelings of burnout? Do we open it up to people as well if they want to give us suggestions?
We have a couple of comments so far, but if someone's, so Natalie Nikkei says, hi Mark.
Hi.
And Donkey Vote Girl said, that grant chasing. ...
Yeah, that grant chasing hustle.
But yeah, if anyone in the chat wants to ask a question or have any thoughts, please feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll read it out for you, so it'll come out of my voice. But I'll also be on the stream forever. So.
And I kind of want to come back to what you were saying about like doing what makes you happy and having like, what did the last thing you said on your point?
Looking at industry notions of success and
Yeah.
getting out of that. Yeah.
All of that kind of stuff. I actually think it takes like a lot of like mental health awareness to separate out like what genuinely makes you happy with no external input.
Yes.
Like what you find validation in, and like what else is going on there, like what's feeding into your sense of self. And I think in the arts industry it's really difficult because often, you know, there's who you are as a person and what makes you happy, and then like the first layer outside of that is your like immediate friendship group who you build community with, who is important to shape your sense of self around. And then there's the exterior layer of like everyone else in the proximity of your being able to know them and how they influence your sense of self. But like the arts tends to blur the line between who is your close support network and who is your professional network.
Yes.
And like not getting an exhibition feels like a rejection of who you are, and that rejection is coming from your peers and your support network. So when you're like working through burnout and when you're working to find your own sense of like ability to be okay within yourself, it's really difficult because like losing professional opportunities also results in the breakdown of your social support structure, especially when you're like doing ARIs or making art with your friends or like that sort of thing.
And vice versa. Like if you burn out and people are relying on you for your productivity, then do you lose your friends? Like that's not cool.
But I think you hit the nail on the head before, changing direction, that opening yourself up to a different possibility, opportunity, Marisa, that you said you started doing zines and you found something in it.
I was so institutionalized before. Like I couldn't believe how much work it took me to be like, no, I get to define what's important. Like it took ages.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, you don't know that you're thinking all of these things you've absorbed until you have the time and space and messaging to understand.
Yeah. I've got a job that pays the mortgage, and it doesn't have much to do with creativity at all. I find little outlets in the job. I work in as a receptionist essentially, and there are some days where I turn up and I've only been there 5 minutes and I think I want to be back doing art stuff, and then on the other hand, when you're doing art stuff, it's coffee beans to the brain going there. That's something completely different, and sure, I've still burned out, but that's my own doing in some ways, but I find it often really helpful that having that world away from art, that chatting to people about it, it's entirely different. That I think being saturated, drowning in it sometimes, that it's hard to feel like you can break away and go, hey, I want to do something different now, because there's that pull back. But
if all your friends are artists.
yeah.
Yeah.
But even something as simple as going, hey, look, maybe I'm going to do printmaking now, or I'll do painting, or let's do really bad performance art, whatever that means. And yeah, it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it? But still that, you can do it.
It does take courage.
I think one of my first like very depressive episodes, which I'm not sure if it was, but I made a commitment to myself that I'd spend a year doing things I was very bad at and just like reveling in the being bad at it. So like I played community soccer and I made wonky bad ceramic mugs and like that was the thing, like only do things without expecting them to be good or for them to be valued by an external community, just like be really bad at soccer for a while.
And that takes so much courage. That's brilliant. It makes me think of the Korean American artist Taeching Si, Hsieh, I think is how you spell his surname. That he's famous for doing year-long performances where at the start of the year that he shaves his head and then documents every single day of the year-long performance. But writes a contract at the start of each performance that what they're going to do for the entire year. So he's a bit nuts, but I love it. That there's a year that he stayed in a cage. There was a year where he was tied to a fellow artist. There's a year where he stayed outdoors for the whole year, wasn't allowed to go inside. And there's a year where he made art every day, but wasn't allowed to show anyone. And then there's a year where he didn't make any art at all. But in doing so, he was making art. Yeah. And I think, he's still always on, which is great. I think that was a really great way to turn it on its head.
I definitely would have slacked off in the year of making art and not showing anyone. I would have just been like, I'm doing stuff.
I'm surprised he hasn't burnt out and doing contracts.
Well, I think
going, this way I also live normally.
I think he only did a certain number of performances, so he may have, but I think that's the crux of it, isn't it? That burnout is normal. Yeah. In some ways.
Absolutely. We have a comment from DocuVote. Does anyone feel like a wanker when you try to explain art stuff to non-art people when it makes so much sense when you're talking to art people?
I think there was a Freeze magazine meme about that where it was when you accidentally use art personality with non-art people. We were saying before that it's important to have friends outside of the arts.
Yes.
As a barometer check of if things are going okay in the arts, because if sometimes you explain the industry to other people, they're like, that's completely whack. If we talked about our labour structure and things. But I also think you were saying before, what makes us artists, I think I ended up going to art school because I was just too neurodivergent to do other things at the time.
And that's okay.
Which, by the way, makes us more prone to burnout as well.
But that's where I found my people, was at art school, where everyone's a bit weird and they want to think critically and have long discussions about obscure topics. And that made me feel very comfortable and at home.
See, I think when I went to art school, I feel like I was trying to find my people, and I guess I ended up doing it. Free critical thinkers that like to be a little bit crazy, but also kind of grounded at the same time. But I think when a non-art person asks me what kind of work do I make, I often preface it by saying, you probably wouldn't understand it. It's conceptual art, and I make wanky art because there's so much stuff on social media and in general general culture where it's the art that I love and make is the one that people right-wing rhetorists are this is destroying Western civilization, it's killing the world, and it's just a guy pulling a plug out from a sand, buckets of sand, and then pulls the bottom one out.
I saw that.
Over, and then you have InfoWars going, this is what's wrong with Western civilization. But I'm like, that's the kind of work I love.
Yeah, me too. I thought that was an amazing performance.
Yeah. And then they're like, look at the idiots clapping behind it. And like, so whenever I meet a non-art person, I'm like, I make wanky art.
Yeah.
What's wrong with being a wanker though? What's wrong with making...
Feels good. No, I'm kidding.
It does. I pride myself on being a wanker and a weirdo, and so what?
Yeah.
I think it's like great to have like a academic practice, you know? Like that's kind of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
We have an academic practice, which is completely fine, but I do get a little bit annoyed at people who think they're like God's gift to culture and that they're really accessible when they're not. It's like it's okay to not be accessible. It's just that you're making stuff for a certain audience, for the art industry audience. Like that's fine. You're an academic.
It's still performing, isn't it? Still performing to belong, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with being a wanker either. That so what? I mean, there's someone out there who makes chocolate assholes, and makes shit machines and
chocolate butt plugs.
Yeah. And so what? That's great. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
That all the people that the painters that we're told that we should love now, that at the time people thought they were crazy, and now they're throwing money at them.
Yeah.
That if Banksy played safe, if Kusama played safe, would they be doing all the things that they want to do? Well, no, they would have just been a good little person and I don't know, being forgotten, but also being forgotten is cool too, right?
Yeah.
For all the talk sorry.
That's okay.
For all the talk about like burning out and how hard working in the arts industry is, I also just fucking love art. Like I love
me
the chocolate
too.
asshole guy. Like I love people just doing things for the sake of doing things because they had a thought and they wanted to express it and they wanted to like materially make it to show it to you to be like, look at my thought, and you're like, wow, that's whack. Good job.
It's not all doom and gloom. We'll talk about things you can do practically to counter burnout later.
Well, Donkey Vote Girl said, that's true, I hadn't connected the neurodivergence with the niche passions in art practice.
Oh, so many. I feel like my whole like friendship group that I graduated with like in the last 2 years have realized they're neurodivergent. None of us knew.
We also have another comment from Pian. I feel like constant academic validation has made it hard to feel okay with showing work that doesn't feel like my best and airtight. But it's so important to sustaining a healthy practice, but I don't know how.
Aries. Show bad art in Aries.
Yes.
It's a good idea.
Show Kaipo just happened for Pian. If you've seen it, it was a great work. Fantastic. We also have another one from Donkey Vote Girl. Please keep destroying Western civilization.
Yes.
We will. Also, just a heads up, we have approximately like half an ish hour left.
Okay.
So
Any
any
on the topic list that we haven't talked
any like burning ideas, get them out.
What else is on the
before the
Actually,
battery
like,
dies.
okay, one thing I wanted to talk about was like the quality of your social relationships and how that contributes to burnout, because definitely it's been my experience that it's not just workload, it's also who are you working with. And, you know, if something's not right, if someone's treating you really poorly, if someone's bullying you, yeah, that makes burnout a lot worse. And there were a lot of dynamics that I didn't get to kind of recognize until later on. I felt like I didn't get that education somehow. So, yeah, I guess I just wanted to talk about that part of it as well.
Hard to identify bullying in the arts because we have such critical discourse and we want the best work out of everyone, and it's difficult to know like other people's situations and what their tolerance for that critique might be at that time, particularly like during exhibition opening night. Like I feel like that's when you're at your most vulnerable, and like critically engaging at that time might not be for the best for the artist, but also might not be the best for the audience member because you're only just seeing the work, you haven't had time to critically reflect on it. So like if everyone took a beat then like the conversation about the work could be a lot more beneficial. And that happens in workplaces as well, where like everyone's pushing each other to be better, to be their best.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people also, you know, if the like organization's underfunded, that extra effort gets pushed onto the low-level staff a lot of the time. Yeah.
I think a big thing as well, being creative, that if you're in a job, you're there to be outside of art, that you're there to be paid, and for a lot of people, they're just there to be paid and then they can go home. But for a lot of us, that we're there because we love art so fucking much. And that's hard when, you're butting heads and you're not just there for the pay. You go, well, what's my limit with the money? What bullshit can I put up with? With art, it's slightly different, isn't it? Because, you said before that, we love it so much. So we all have really strong opinions, and because we really want it to go well, and sometimes in those heated emotional moments that you forget that we should be coming together rather than thinking that the other person's competition, because ultimately it's for the art, isn't it?
Definitely.
Which is one of the great joys.
I mean, and that's definitely like one of the really interesting things is that, you know, being part of BVA, you definitely have people approach you being like, I had this terrible experience with someone, and you're like, wow, their practice is like really feminist or something. It's like they have all these like progressive politics in their like outward facing persona, or if they're a curator, like, there's such a like feminist curator or something. And then interpersonally or in the organization they're managing or something like that, it's like a totally different story, and you would never know it from like looking at that institution or relationship from the outside.
I do think like difficult workplace relationships can happen because in the arts, because of a compounding effect of the pressures and expectations that are put on artists, arts workers and institutions. Like, our funding model is so scarce that the amount being asked from a director of an institution is like an impossible task. And then when they're not able to fulfill it, like it trickles down to like the next level of management, to like you were saying, the entry level workers. And then when somebody burns out, like, because we have a community structure, an arts community as well as an arts industry, you feel such a sense of guilt of like, if I don't do it, then who's going to have to do it? Because the chances are that is like not only your co-worker, but your friend or an artist you really admire, or an arts worker you know is already struggling and having a hard time. So like, I think we have a habit of pushing ourselves further than we should, because we're all cashing in that goodwill towards each other and the goodwill towards the arts community and the industry the institutions we might be working for. And like, we don't want to let the community down, and and you know, like, you're just passing it on and somebody else is going to go through the burnout once you, or like
that resentment builds up. I'm working harder than the other people.
Yeah.
Why aren't they self-exploiting to the same level that I am? Like,
it's that fight for legitimacy, isn't it? That, I don't want to seem bad and pass this on, and so I'll do it.
I'm definitely one of the people that takes on too much of the stuff.
With that like compounding effect of stress as well, like what you were saying about like their practice is so feminist, but like their actions in the workplace might not match up with it. Like, just as an example, I think it is like what we were talking about being able to identify what makes you happy within yourself, and then like, as soon as those stress levels start to build up and the expectations start to build up, the easiest thing to let go of is like what makes you feel whole in your sense of self. And then you just like, you no longer have a window of tolerance for responding to situations. Like, you're just always in like a survival reactionary state where like you have to do whatever's going to get you through that period. You don't have time to recenter and like work out why you're doing the work to begin with, and if it's making you or like the people around you happy. And like, I try and be very compassionate towards people who might act out towards others in the art industry, because I don't think the buck stops with them, and I think there's a lot of like daisy chain effects of like why we're all like,
it's bigger than the individual. It's bigger than the individual that you're having the problem with. They got it from somewhere.
So culturally we're getting better at learning to disengage in those situations, I guess, because we've got the language around that to go like, right, well, the buck stops here, like, let's not fight about this, or, you know, I'm not going to talk to you because that's going to cause too much chaos, and let's nut this out and sort it out and things will be fine. But why are we not so good at doing it for ourselves, that you know, we're pushing ourselves internally and we're not talking to anyone else because, you know, we're heading towards the burnout? Why as a culture, that this could be rhetorical, I don't know, that are we not good at going, hey, let's disengage, let's rest, let's take a break? But it's
I
so
guess
difficult.
like being a perfectionistic people pleaser is great for capitalism, and it actually like valorizes it until you can't work anymore, and then it's your personal failure because you didn't have good enough boundaries or whatever. You didn't have enough work-life balance. But it's really like culturally sort of valorized a lot.
And I think it was what you were saying earlier about like, we just love art so fucking much. Like, like there isn't a distinction between the work we're doing and who we are as people and what we're passionate about. Like, what makes us fulfilled as individuals becomes part of our jobs. And so like you don't rest because you want to do the thing that makes you happy. So like, finding things outside of the arts that also makes you happy, I guess, is a solution. But also like just knowing that as well, that like maybe you don't need to turn your arts practice into a product or a profession. Maybe it can just be something that makes you happy.
It doesn't have to be binary though. You can still do it. I mean, I'm in the tough spot now where I'm thinking the thing that does make me happy also causes me upset. That what do you do then? And I don't know. Maybe we'll find out the answers soon.
So difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because you get a lot of this like self-care, like.
Which sounds really hokey.
It's really, a lot of the time it is really hokey because it's just sort of saying like, it's putting the onus on the individual to prevent their own burnout, whereas like, you know, if like the industry is structured in a certain way that makes that worse, it shouldn't be all on you as an individual to do that.
It's not in a vacuum.
But there is like, totally. Often it's also just trying to sell you more stuff like candles or whatever.
I like candles. Buy the Beaver candle.
Yeah, exactly.
$2.95.
Can we make a Beaver self-care candle?
Yes, that's a great
Do
idea.
we need merch?
But there is like...
Yes. Both.
Yeah.
Or once you've finished, it becomes a bath bomb.
Yeah.
But I was going to say there is critical self-care that can be really important and effective, and some of the stuff I've personally found that I think fits that category is like a critical mindset change, like not just like a self-optimizing mindset change, but like, wow, this like is to a great extent not my fault. This stuff is to a great extent things that I've internalized, and the way the industry is structured and things like that, because knowing it's not your fault is actually like a mental load off. I guess also like, looking at where you have like perfectionism or people pleasing kind of tendencies, because that does sort of, I've found that it like maps onto capitalism really badly. Those sort of like tendencies that might have come from like a completely different place, like something when you were growing up or whatever, kind of just map onto the way capitalism wants you to self-exploit. So taking a really good look at that is helpful. That's two examples of mine. I don't know if they're things.
I think you're touching on really important points, that resisting the system, that I think I was alluding to that before, that it's okay to be a wanker. It's we're not in high school anymore. We have to go with the flow. I mean, high school was shit. For a lot of people, it's true. That it's okay to, in China, with the high ideals of the capitalist notions, to be, we're not robots, we're not these fine-tuned oiled machines that we're pumping out an artwork every 2 minutes. That we're fallible human beings, and it's okay to trip up, and it's okay to burn out, and so what? Right.
And can I actually talk about UBI before we go?
Yes, we can talk about UBI.
Okay.
Wait, you said UBI, not UTI.
UBI.
Just checking. Sorry.
Because we were saying before, like, looking after yourself and doing, like, critical self-empowerment and self-care is really important and great. It does make a difference, but at the same time, can we all please start advocating for industry restructure? And one really good model that I personally love is having a basic income for artists and everyone. I think everyone should have one, but the arts industry could start advocating for that, and it was mentioned in the most recent national cultural policy, so that was kind of exciting. Like, they didn't give it to us, but it got mentioned. But imagine having, like, just a solid income coming in so that you didn't have to worry about how commercially viable your practice was or how much grant money you're getting and things like that.
Sorry to interrupt you for a second, but I only did, because I'm a bit slow, that UBI is universal basic income, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, sorry. It would just be like an ongoing regular payment, which kind of suits artists in a particular way, because we're doing all that labour we talked about, the immaterial stuff that's really hard to boundary. And I think for anything that's more like a vocation than a job, it's just like a really good model for that.
I think in the latest cultural policy, there was talk about if you're on job seeker or like a benefit payment, artistic outcomes would count towards like your mutual obligations. Like, that was massive. Like, if you have an exhibition, it is equivalent to applying for a job. Like, that level of recognition was unheard of previously, which is wild that, like, we're picking up those crumbs and being like, thank you so much. And what you were saying earlier about, like, if you don't know how to rest and you burn out, you feel like it's your fault. I think, like, the analogy just popped into my head of, like, recycling, where, like, companies started producing products in containers that were disposable and then invented the concept of recycling to make you responsible for dealing with the waste that they created.
Yes.
Like, UBI, I think, maybe breaks that chain, where it's like, we're contributing to a creative ecology that makes cities livable and makes communities vibrant and connected, and from that people are able to be productive for society. And from that productivity, excess wealth is created and hoarded. And then it's your fault that you're not able to contribute to the level that you need to because you're not resting enough. It's like, why don't we just take some of the wealth that we have created and fed up to the system and redistribute it back down so that you get a chance to have a break.
I love that.
So, because I'm a total novice and I only just realised what UBI stands for, how do I get that? No, it's a serious question. Like, can I buy it in a shop, or what do I do?
Ireland has done a pilot in the last few years, so it's actually something that does exist in some places in the world. And I was part of a little crew that wrote a policy submission about an artist basic income for the National Cultural Policy. So I would say just like start advocating within your industry to get it. It was actually really, like, I didn't obviously look at every one of the like thousands of submissions that went to the National Cultural Policy, but none of the institutions were advocating for a UBI. Like, none of the institutions were advocating for any like artist support related stuff. They were just advocating for institutional support. And I think that should change, because we're the producers that make the stuff that your institution runs on. Like,
could you imagine the weight of institutions if they were no longer responsible for providing the only means of income for an artist during the working period of a project? Like, then they could refocus their resources on actually developing their organizations and institutions rather than being the only mechanism for like artist support. And to get like really nerdy and like bring out my law student for a second, I do think like UBI, Universal Basic Income, it's also been referred to in it's an artist basic income. I think in the UK they briefly had one, like they tried it out, but in terms of how to get it in Australia, I kind of think it needs to be a bigger thing than just arts workers. And I think particularly with how the dichotomy of our political system is structured, something that like brings everyone together is like how difficult it is for small business owners. And I think we saw that during the pandemic when like job keeper was brought out as a welfare payment. And like I think if we took a second to step back from particularly Australian society, which has built up this cult around small business owners being the backbone of the Australian economy, it is wild to me that like a mum and pop shop is responsible for somebody's ability to live, access food, access shelter. And if their business doesn't do well, then that person isn't able to live anymore. That's a huge amount of pressure to put on a small business owner. And I think that applies like across the sector, where if we had a universal basic income, if that employee's base salary was covered to a stable state, and then the profit from the mum and pop shop was distributed to that employee if they produced an excess of labor that contributed value to the organization, like that seems so much more sustainable than expecting like individuals to be responsible for the welfare of another person, for their food and shelter. And and like same for the arts industry. Like if we took that pressure off the industry of providing food and shelter and the ability to live for artists, like we'd be a lot better off.
Yes.
And we could refocus.
Definitely. Aye. All the big questions and all the big themes and stuff. I guess I like to think practically. And I'm thinking of ideas how to counteract all these feelings and emotions and the system, which is huge, isn't it? That it's, where do you start with that? I think Marisa alluded to that before, making zines, and you've talked about taking time off. Are there other things that you do to alleviate, to remedy burnout?
Other things I do to alleviate burnout?
Yeah.
I have a psychologist, which initially I perceived as like being really inaccessible, because of how much it costs, and then I think I also used like the inaccessibility as a crutch to not access it, because like it is really hard work and it makes you feel real vulnerable, and but like coming from like a lower socioeconomic background, I also found engaging with mental health services really difficult, because
it's very important.
They often couldn't relate to like, why am I unwell? Because housing isn't stable for me. Like I don't know if I'll be able to live where I'm living in 6 months' time. And like I went on a tangent. I think I'm in rant mode after the UBI moment.
I think it's really good to broaden it.
Yes.
I mean, like, the UBI thing is really good not only if you're an artist or a gig economy worker, but also, like, if you're a parent, if you're, if you do a lot of community work, if you are an activist, if you want to spend your time doing something like caring for country, which is economically undervalued, and all these kinds of like labor that our economic system doesn't currently remunerate anyone for. It's good for all of those people, and sometimes I do wonder whether this whole like arts job is a real job kind of thing that the government was peddling really hardcore in the last release of the National Cultural Policy is actually quite the right tact, because I'm kind of like, okay, do we want to just like absorb ourselves into the system of work as it is right now, and who are we leaving behind if we do that? We're kind of leaving behind like mums and people with disabilities and people who engage in all these other forms of labor, and like I would personally want to align my labor with people doing that kind of work, because all of that work is also creative. It's also, you know, it's largely feminized labor, you know, falls disproportionately on people who live regionally, for people who are from non-Western communities, like all these kinds of things.
Isn't it hard then that if times are tough, money's tight, that we're all burned out and we've got no time and we've got no money, how do we find time to advocate? I don't know, but what do we do then?
Oh, I said this recently because I was part of the renters union, and they were like organising direct action, and I was like, I am working 6.5 days a week to be able to afford my rent, so I no longer have the time to resist the system, and I kind of think it's designed that way.
Totally.
The gig economy.
Totally.
I think like we're meant to be so busy that we don't have time to resist.
Oh yeah, a couple of decades ago the dole was basically like funding activism, and the government didn't like it, so it made you do all these what are they called, job point things,
Work for the
Work
job.
active.
Mutual
job active
mutual
workers.
obligations.
Mutual
Oh my
obligations.
god,
Yeah.
it's such a terrible term for it.
And person who writes all the cultural policy submissions.
Okay.
Like, you're very interested in institutional reform,
Yeah.
but like you also have to be quite clued in and engaged in the institution and the like system to be able to resist it in those ways. And then arts work also seems like anti-institutional in a lot of regards. So like there's Marisa, social worker, who engages in the system, and Marisa, artist, who resists the system. How did those two things coexist in you?
When I was so lucky doing a Master of Social Work, because we did this whole like critical reflection subject that was really geared towards how do you be a critical social worker, particularly when you're engaged in all of these like kind of hostile institutions, like if you're going into a jail or prison, like working with prisoners, like if you're working in hospitals, which are incredibly bureaucratic, small organizations that are getting more and more managerial, things like that. So it was actually like, yeah, there was this amazing process we all engaged in to look at how we do that. And I don't know, there was a lot of talking about power and how power works, which is a really important. We should do a stream about power sometime.
We should.
Yeah, that would be really fun.
Restine is claiming
but it
your power.
is definitely possible. Yeah, it's about your approach and how you think about it and things like that. Yeah, it would be amazing if they taught artists that as well. Yeah, so I don't think they have to be separated, I think is what I was saying. But there's also nothing wrong with agitating from the outside. Like, that's great.
I guess like the reason I asked the question is because throughout this conversation I like keep coming back to like whether I want to make my income off arts work or whether I want to disengage with that from being like my profession.
Yeah.
So that it can go back to being something compassionate about.
It's a very personal choice, hey?
It doesn't have to be binary. It can have a bit from here, a bit from there. That doesn't mean that you have to shut it off at the switch. You can do a bit of everything.
I'm kind of tired of doing a bit of everything though.
Yes. Yes.
God, sometimes I just crave the like full-time government job or something. But then I'd have to give up all the cool stuff I do.
But you don't
Get
have
really
to.
bored, surely.
Yeah, I probably would.
But you don't have to. I mean, sure, I'm here talking about burnout. Hi. That I've got a government job, and I remember when I finished school that I thought, right, I can't go to art and do that, something that I want to do and I'm good at, because it's not going to make any money, or this idea of that, optimal decision making, which, what does that even mean? That you're making the right choice, and what is the right choice? And I went out and got a job, and oh gosh, I sound like a politician now, I'm sorry.
Go out and get a job.
Got a job at being a public servant, and as I mentioned before, it's coffee beans to the brain, it's different from the art world. And got to see so many creative people doing it. There's no shame in working to pay the bills and put food on the table. Oh, yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. And they also got to do their art, and sure, it's not full time, and sure, I'm here doing this and burning out, but yeah, you can do this and that you don't have to go, right, I want to choose art and do it full time and do it all the time, because
Do you feel like you have 2 full-time jobs though?
I like to say that I do art full time and I work part time, and I struggle to fit all that in.
Yeah.
Which it's really difficult to reckon with sometimes, because you have this idea in your head and you're like, yeah, I'm reaching all my goals and I'm doing the things I want to do, and you're riding that high, but of course you burn out. And I think trying to find out practical ways of coping is the key, isn't it? That you mentioned seeing a psychologist before. That helps me, having a psychologist, but not everyone has the privilege to afford that. And I think the next step would be, we'll talk to a GP, and if you can't afford that, well, there are other avenues too, to talk to someone professionally, that if you're still at uni, that you can access counselling and psychology. I did that in my days at QUT, and that if you have a job, that you can access employee benefits too and see someone that way. Or that we mentioned before, that talking to someone outside of art is important too, that sometimes you're explaining something that is so muddled up in your head that getting that clarity is amazing, isn't it?
Can also call up Beaver and look for some peer support if you want to. Yeah. We won't solve it for you, but we can definitely, exactly. But peer support is good, and actually, if you have safe friends, safe friends are incredible support.
Definitely.
Also, journaling for me is a free psychologist. When I first started doing therapy, I was going every fortnight because I was in crisis mode. And then now it's once every month or once every 2 months, but in between that, what you were saying about your thoughts getting very cyclical and not being able to muddle them out, putting pen to paper about it, it's good. Good little self-care.
Yes.
Write about your feelings.
Yeah.
And it's okay to not do stuff.
Yeah.
That, I mentioned before, some days I just stay in bed and then, I've got this one thing to do today, and get out and do that, and then you can crawl back into bed. That you shouldn't feel shame or guilt doing that. Sometimes the work gets better because you've thought about it even more.
Yeah. And sometimes stuff that doesn't even look like psychology is really good. In social work, we call it non-deliberative interventions, which are just the community garden, or...
I thought you were talking about memes. Memes are great.
Non-deliberate interventions are memes.
Yeah, the community garden, or a community choir and community art projects and things like that, which aren't actually therapy, but are healing. They're healing, yeah.
They are.
Yeah. I do singing lessons. I find it really, really amazing and regulating. They are expensive though. They're my one expensive thing that I do.
Cat videos and dog videos on YouTube are they're free.
Very
and
accessible.
They're pretty accessible, and
YouTube Shorts.
Yes.
No, don't ruin your attention span scrolling.
So just a heads up, Cameron's probably got it's on its last minutes.
Okay, any final
That was pretty cute
questions?
though. I think that was a nice little...
So, I kind of want to go back to Pion's comment.
Yeah, sorry.
Because I feel I kind of went over that too quickly. I feel the constant academic validation has made it hard to feel okay with showing work that doesn't feel the best and airtight, but it's so important to sustaining a healthy practice. Any thoughts on that?
having a good relationship with failure is really hard, but it's great when you actually snag it.
Yeah.
It's really good when you actually snag it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have a comment from Renee Curie. I needed to hear all this. The arts is such a difficult field to navigate, and it's hard finding the correct balance for my own mental well-being.
Definitely.
Aww.
That's
But
so nice.
With Pian's comment that you don't need to have an academic background to be an artist
No.
at all. You can do so many things, and you don't need the academic, to study for it.
Or you could do a little bit of both. If you are currently in the institution and producing academic work,
Definitely.
you can save your airtight stuff for what you're being graded on and make really bad art on the side.
Yeah.
And put it in weird places.
Sometimes bad art is really good art. And sometimes really good art is actually pretty terrible.
And I guess that also, like, coming back to what is validating, you don't derive all your validation from institutional results.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because the institution's supporting one particular kind of practice doesn't mean that's the only successful kind of practice.
Yeah.
So you don't have to emulate the way that they've done it.
Yeah.
Make
Just
art
to
on
be
your
true to
terms.
yourself.
Yeah. I think, like, paying attention to how you actually feel in your body and also emotionally, like, it was kind of strange how much I devalued the fact that I felt disappointed after every gallery opening for so long. Like, I was like, oh, but it's going to be good at some point. It's like, no, that actually just wasn't the most fulfilling, like, format at the time. But, like, in terms of the feelings, it was like, okay, I'd be like anxious and panicked beforehand, and then during it I'd be like, this is like weird but okay, but I still don't feel entirely comfortable, and then like at the end it would be like, oh my god, like the thing's over and I don't feel good. And it's like, yeah, pay attention to that stuff. Like, like that's valuable intel. Yeah, and it's going to be different for everyone, obviously. I'm not saying exhibitions suck, but I think I'll go back at some point.
I always feel depressed after a show of my own. Anytime, through records or like anything else, when I go up to an artist after a show, I always like want to talk to them about the work, but like, with that perspective of like, I've never felt like good about a show. And that's just because I've spent so much time working on that thing, and then once it's out there, I can't work on it anymore.
Yeah.
And because like artists are process-driven people, right?
It's like
we're not about
down.
we're not about the completed product or like the completed object. We're all about that in between moment of like actually making the thing.
The process.
And
And imagine if the industry looked after your process instead of only caring about your product.
Exactly.
It'd be so much better.
Yeah. So like Lincoln Austin and Kira Lee Robinson did a thing at Wreckers last year. Maybe that was last year.
Yes.
And where they just occupied the space, and that was like all about their process and how they work with one another. And I thought that was so important. I wish we could have like actually paid them. Like we can't pay anyone at Wreckers because it's like low key, but
Totally.
it's so important.
Is this the part where we finish the chat so it's unfinished? Process.
I said it in the chat. We can continue after the camera dies in audio only mode if you like.
Cool.
But we'll hear it turn off or go click.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talaris also said thank you all so much for your contributions.
Aw, thanks, Talara.
Thanks, Talara.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm going to do a call out to close off
Yes.
the podcast.
Cool.
We're going to make a zine because we really like zines at the moment. But we're going to make a zine about burnout. And we're asking artists to be involved. It's going to be an anthology of different artists' experiences. You can respond to like the topic of burnout in any way you see fit on an A4 paper or whatever goes into a zine. But yeah, we want to collate it all as like a little like you're not in this alone. Lots of people have been through it, and everyone's experienced it in different ways, and we think it would be nice to package that all up as something the community could hold on to.
Yeah.
So if you want to do it, like Instagram us, Facebook us, email us.
And we'll probably be interested to hear about what you would want out of the process too. So we haven't like finalized what the process would look like. We'll just send us an email being like, yeah, I'm keen in principle, and we'll go from there.
We might create a group and then also ask the group what they actually want the end product to be, so that everyone can equally contribute.
Yes.
We can have a making day. Where
Making
we'll get
day.
together.
Oh.
And we can all hang out and we can like decide how it like goes together maybe.
Yeah, that sounds
That'd be
great.
really fun.
Yes.
Well, it has to be in crayons, not problem.
Or don't.
Great.
We understand that you're all burned out.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
pressure. No pressure.
We'll accept blank pages.
Yeah.
I
We'll,
would
we'll
like
try
that
and
if
make
it
the
was just a
process
page
like
with an
healing and
advert.
wholesome.
Yes.
Should we sign off?
Sure.
August woke up just to say goodbye to everyone.
Oh,
August wants to make a porno with me.
the
I think.
star of the show.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you.
Thank
having
you,
me.
Mark.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We love you.
Any final thoughts?
Look after
Well,
yourselves.
well,
Look
Yes.
after yourselves.
Yes. Rest.
Industry reform.
I'm surprised the camera lasted.
Yeah,
To be
it's
honest.
amazing.
I'm-
Props to
Yeah.
Amelia.
Oh my god.
Thank you, Amelia,
Thank you,
for looking
Amelia.
after
That's-
tech
that's
and setting
almost
it
like
up.
Thank you for your
Hour
comments
and
and
40
questions.
minutes. So,
Amazing.
Ah, we talked.
all right.
We did talk a lot.
So I'm gonna end the stream.
Bye.
Alright, bye
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye everyone. Thank you for watching.